Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Intuitive Catalyst podcast. I'm Leilani, your host, and today is a solo episode. It has been 2 years, over 2 years, since I last recorded an episode, and it's been 2 really rich and wonderful years. There's been so much learning. I've been really focusing on my business. There has just been so much happening, and I was ready. I was ready to come back. And so here I am. I am recording video right now, so I'm also on YouTube, which is different. It has been an evolution for me to sink into this new place where I'm showing up, and it's been really fun, and I'm glad to be back. I have no notes, per usual, y'all. I have no notes, and the powers that be were just like, show up. I was hearing from my higher self, my spirit guides, my ancestors, source God, the universe, to just show up, to re-welcome you to the space. It feels so good to be back, y'all, and to be here with you. And it's been a thick couple of years. It has been thick, y'all. The energy has been thick. It's been an interesting couple of years. So first and foremost, I want to speak to the evolution that's happening. There is a lot happening energetically. We are in a moment of many people are in different places, but as a collective, we're in a deep reckoning. We're in a reckoning with this idea of who we have been, who we want to be or become, and who we are in this moment. And so I haven't spoken a lot about Dolores Cannon. She is a spiritual author. She was an expert in hypnotherapy. So she's done a lot of work with just receiving messages, tracking messages, capturing messages from energies outside of our world, essentially. And she speaks of this energy called New Earth. So there's Old Earth, where we've been navigating this old earth energy, and we as a collective are deciding if we are transitioning into this new earth energy. It's prophetic, and it's also not, because we have so many choices to make as a collective. And in order to transition to this new earth energy, which is lighter, it's like moving from the 3D into the 4D or the 5D. So being able to source from our intuition, from our higher selves, to embody an experience that is less dense than we've been experiencing. Like being human in the 3D, it comes with a lot of density, and that comes with a lot of the stuff of the past, our traumas, our just things that get in our way. I call them competing molecules that compete with our wanting to be lighter, to be in less dense, higher frequency experiences. I call those competing molecules because they're part of our 3D vessel. They're part of who we are. They're a result of our trauma experiences. They're a result of other lives that we've lived and the shit that we're carrying with us. So we have these like competing molecules. I also call them traffic jams, because they kind of jam up our system and our ability to hear clearly from our bodies and to receive information clearly through our bodies. And so when we think about old earth, it is very much this higher density, lots of traffic jams, lots of competing molecules, lots of places and spaces where we are kind of playing small in a lot of ways. And New Earth is less dense. It's fewer traffic jams. It's fewer competing molecules. It's living into an experience that is far more divine. It is not as challenging in a lot of ways. It is more easeful. We still have all of the emotions that we reckon with, that we sit with at all times, and yet it is a more expansive experience. And so when we think about this transition from the old earth energy into this new earth energy, it requires a reckoning with, okay, am I going to let go of the things that have been traditionally keeping me safe? and maybe places where I've been playing too small. Am I willing to step into courage to let go of all of that in service of bringing in an experience that is more expansive and where more of my soul desires can come to life? And it is something that we are deciding individually. It's also something we're seeing on a collective level. We're seeing people really dig their heels into this old earth energy and kind of fight for its existence. And we see those of us who are choosing love and light and reckoning with our shadows in service of bringing forward an experience as a collective that is more easeful, more expansive, more purposeful, more loving. It is happening. It is happening and it is here. And we get to choose. We get to choose who we're going to be. And so the last couple of years has been a lot of that for me. Digging into my shadows, trying psychedelics. I tried shrooms for the first time in the last couple of years. I've been doing a lot of inner work, trauma work, just really going through it in service of welcoming this new earth energy, this new earth experience. And so that is who I am today. That is who I am now. You might notice some of the ways that I show up on the podcast might feel a little different. I feel less guarded in a lot of ways. I feel less like I need to censor myself. And I don't mean just like cursing, because we all know I don't do that, but censoring myself in the sense of, in the past, I've worried that if I really show up fully, if I say all of the things on my mind, if I say all of the things that I'm channeling and that are coming through me, will I still have credibility? Will I still have respect? Will I still have a platform? And a lot of those fears in the last couple of years, that with this reckoning that I've been moving through, really working with my shadows and finding the lessons that are available to me with my shadow work, I've let go of a lot of that. And so my hope is for these upcoming episodes that you find a bit more transparency in the ways that I am showing up, in the ways that I am asking questions and bringing wisdom forward. I'm super excited for this evolution, and I can't wait for you all to experience it as well. I think that I have kind of gone even further into, if it were possible, gone even further into this notion that I am not for everyone. I'm really not. I'm really not. And that's actually something that I say in the very first episode, the one that dropped in 2021. I said I'm not for everyone. And I think that I've just deepened my journey into that, knowing that I know that the people who are meant to hear these messages, the people who are meant to receive the wisdom, the people who are meant to understand the anecdotes are going to be here and they're going to find me. And my hope for this podcast is such that I can provide some clarity, some light, some guidance, something that can support you in the ways that you are navigating your experience. And the way that I do that is just showing up. And I truly believe that most of us in our lives, that is how we make a difference, is by showing up, by deepening our connection to ourselves, understanding who we are on a soul level, and showing up in those ways. No matter what industry, no matter what job, no matter what your family situation looks like, no matter what, I believe that what will change our world is people like you and I sourcing deeply into our soul path and our soul's calling and our intuition to show up more fully, more authentically in this realm. Which leads me to my next exploration, which I had an inkling that this is what we would be talking about, is authenticity. I have been working my entire adult life and probably even a bit of like my teenagehood on this notion of authenticity. And I deepened into this exploration as I went into like my master's program. My master's program was in leadership development, and I took some classes with a dear friend and mentor of mine, Bill Weiss at Seattle University. And his classes expanded my sense of what leadership is. And it was very much centered around showing up as your whole self, being authentic, leadership development from the sense of just speaking your truth. Like, what does it look like to connect with your emotional truth and communicate through that? And so I have been spending a lot of my energy, my time in my adult life connecting with this concept of authenticity. And I now, as a shamanic practitioner and coach, and someone who actually works within organizations to do this work, authenticity has become the core of it. And when I think about every single client that I support, every single organization I've supported, authenticity is always at the center. It's always at the forefront. What does that mean? So let's just talk about authenticity for a moment. I don't have the definition, the dictionary definition of it in front of me because I have no notes, y'all. And yet, when I think of authenticity, what flows to me is alignment. Like, what does it actually look like to be aligned with our most authentic self? And when I think of our most authentic self, I think of a couple of things. I think of our higher self. So the version of us that is connected to energy, the energy that's all around us, the energy of the all, the energy of source, God, the universe. We have a layer of us spiritually that is connected to all of those things, right? And so when I think of authenticity, what I think of is almost divine authenticity. Like, what does it actually look like and feel like to be deeply aligned with our soul self? And not only that, what does it look like for us to be expressive of that self in our day-to-day life? It sounds so revolutionary for us to connect with our soul self and then to walk around the world, like walk around our day-to-day, be in our day-to-day experience aligned with that version of us. It feels so wild to consider that that is a revolutionary thing in our world. But when I think about what is the norm, what is the standard, and this was true for me as well, the standard in our world is to have a different mask or facade, is to show up a certain way, especially Black and Brown folks. We have an expectation that is ingrained very early on in our lives to be different when we show up in spaces, especially when our safety is concerned, our financial safety, sometimes our physical safety. If I think of Black people being out in the world, they have to be navigating the world with such intention to stay physically safe, right? And so we have these masks, we have these personas, we have these facades that we have put on in order to continue to be safe. And what so much of the energy that's flowing around us at all times these days, what so much of it is telling me, what I'm interpreting from the energy of this moment, is that we are safe. We get to sink into our soul self. We get to trust that our soul self is going to guide us in order to be authentic. And this authenticity, it's not something that is, it's not always easy. It's not always easeful to say, okay, well, I know who I am authentically. I know who I am as my soul self. Even those who are deeply tapped into who we are, it's not always easy to be expressive of that in our day-to-day, and especially in places where trauma has occurred, our families of origin or the workplace, right? It's not easy or easeful. And it doesn't always make sense for me to say, hey, Black and Brown folks, like, you get to show up as your whole self. That's not always going to be the case, and that's not always true, right? So we have to consider that there are a lot of factors that come into this notion of authenticity. We have to be really mindful about telling people, hey, show up as your whole self when the conditions are not such that that's actually truly safe for them, right? So we have to consider all of these things and consider that our soul self is ready to be expressed. So what does that mean? What does that look like? How can we actually begin to do that in a way that is in our integrity, in a way that we are still preserving our 3D safety, our physical safety, our financial safety? We hear source, God, the universe, our ancestors, benevolent ancestors, our spirit guides telling us you're so safe. And it's true. We are so safe. And we have to consider that we are in a world that still is tapped into the matrix. We are not in New Earth yet, right? So we have to navigate within systems at times that require us to be mindful about the ways that we are expressing ourselves authentically. When I first started this podcast, I told a lot of stories about my spiritual awakening. And when I connect with that version of me that experienced a spiritual awakening, I started to hear voices. I started to experience channeled messages. It was very kind of wild. And it just made sense to me because of who I am to blow up my life, to leave my corporate job, to leave my marriage at the time, to blow up my life. And that was the thing that made the most sense at the time, because to me, living into my soul self and my soul path and being deeply authentic was my highest priority. It was higher than preserving my safety. It was higher than reckoning in the fear for any longer. But when I think about who I was before I did all of that, I was a shell of who I am spiritually. Before my spiritual awakening, before everything blew up, I was medicated for anxiety and depression. I was miserable. I just had a girls' weekend with some friends of mine, and we were talking about the common state of people, many people in our world is just this moving through the motions with this low level emotion of or just experience of being miserable. And that was me. That was me. And something had to give. I knew that I was not living into who I knew I wanted to be. I was a newer mom, and I know that a lot of new moms struggle with postpartum depression and anxiety. I know that there are a lot of moms who I've had friends who are just like, I don't know who I am anymore after having kids, or many years after having kids, um, losing ourselves, right? And so I had found myself in that place. That was my experience. And so it's not to say that it's easy to connect with our soul self. I'm not saying it's easy to connect with our intuition and begin to live more authentically. I'm not even saying it's something that happens quickly. Like, it happened quickly for me, but I don't recommend that for anybody. I blew up my life in the matter, and this is what I wrote my book about. In the matter of 3 to 4 months, I had completely upended my life. I had quit my corporate job. I had left my husband. All of that happened within the span of a few months. And it's not something that ever happens that quickly. It's not something that I think should ever happen that quickly, honestly. I mean, should, maybe, maybe not, but I do know how difficult it can be to do it that way, and how scary that can be. And we never want to be in a place where our fear is so debilitating. We never want to move into what's next for us with any kind of fear that is that enormous. When the fear is that big, where it feels like this is terrifying, this is going to rip me apart, that is never in soul alignment. And they never say never. The spirit guides, source, God, the universe, they're saying you will never be asked to walk forward on your path in that much discord. It will never feel that way. And yet, what is common and what does happen is a level of fear that is not outweighed by your knowing who you are, your sense of courage, your sense of authenticity, your deep connection to the divine. Those experiences generally outweigh this debilitating fear. And so for those, I feel like there's so many of you out there right now that are just like, I know I need to leave. I know I need to do this, but it's just like this fear that's keeping you very frozen. And that is okay. That is also part of your perfect experience. What your guides need you to know in this moment is when that arises, it's not about just pushing through that fear. That fear has come up for you to be examined, to go deeper into the fear. And that I can feel many of you feeling fearful of that even. And yet, our fear, this was a message I just got before I started recording when I was channeling and meditating before I started. That fear, all fear, but especially that fear that feels like there's no possible way I can do this. When it feels like everything in your body is tensed up and you're like you're shaking, whatever it is, that fear is ready to be examined. And that fear always has a lesson for us. It always has a lesson for us. When I think about one of the most fearful times of my entire spiritual, I don't know, awakening experience, whatever, since 2020, when I started this process, one of the most fearful times, especially early on, was when I was writing my book. And I don't want to give spoilers, but there's a couple of chapters actually, that I was so fearful to channel and write. And it was because they held some of the most fear. I had the most fear going into those places and spaces. And yet, what always guided me forward was holding hands with God, Source, Universe, or holding hands with my little brother, who's a central part of my book. Just being able to recognize that this fear is ready to be examined, right? So before I can move forward in my life, in whatever it is, whatever decision point is at my fingertips, whatever reckoning is required, before I make that choice, before I take right action, I have to be able and willing to sit with the fear. I have to look the fear in the eye and begin to understand it. And I don't mean understanding from like a heady level. I mean spiritual clarity. We have to be able and willing to go into our fears in service of spiritual clarity. This is something that I support a lot of clients around. If it feels too much, if it feels too heavy to do that on your own, I do recommend working with, a therapist or even someone like me, a shamanic practitioner or an energy worker, Reiki, whatever. Make sure that you have the support you need, but it is time. I'm hearing your guide say it is time for you to begin to examine those fears, because what you'll find is you're so much fucking stronger and you're so much braver and you're so much more expansive than this fear is telling you that you are. And again, it's not that I don't like to demonize fear, because I do believe that fear is just another portal from which we can learn. And if you have the support you need, if you feel like it's time and you're ready and your intuition is telling you to move forward with or without support, you get to trust that. And on the other side of, and this is what I mean by shadow work. I think some of the deepest shadow work that we can do is to go deeply into our fears and to just examine that and to begin to sit with it and to feel it all. Like feel the most scared you've ever felt. Let yourself think of all the worst case scenarios. Go deeply into those fears. That is what I mean by shadow work. And the beautiful thing about this process is the more that we begin to understand our fears, the more we begin to understand ourselves. We cannot reckon with our fears. We can't go deeply into what scares us the most in this world without understanding and having more clarity about who we are on a soul level, on a 3D level. It is the most important work we can do. And so many of you are light workers, and you will be going in with your lanterns, supporting your clients, supporting the people in your lives, or even light workers within corporate. You're going in, you are the one holding the light. That is why they're called light workers. It's why you are called light workers, because you're going in and you're bringing the light. But what happens when we bring light into spaces that were traditionally dark? You begin to highlight the shadows, you begin to highlight the things within those spaces that would cause us grief and trouble. It's the things that we've been hiding from. It's the things that our companies have been hiding from. It's the things that our clients have been hiding from. But what happens is when you turn on the light, most of the time, it is it is not as debilitating. It's not going to kill us. It's not the thing that's going to take us out. It's the thing that's going to set us free. It's the thing that's going to set us free, is to begin to examine our fears. And I would be willing to put money on the fact that if this is a process where you are doing it in your spiritual integrity, you are either getting the support you need or you're doing it on your own because you have the tools, whatever that may look like and be. I have so much confidence in the fact that once you begin to examine these fears, once you really begin to go deeply into the suffering places within you, that you're going to have so much more clarity and ease about decisions that you have been toiling with maybe for years. I know people who have been going back and forth in places of indecision about their relationships, their work, their whatever it is, the ways that they parent, whatever it is, their trauma, that they've been going back and forth about making a change. And yet, the moment you begin to really go to the root of what is it truly that I am fearful of? What is it that I am most afraid of? Once you begin to shine lights in those places in your energy body, in your psyche, wherever those fears reside, I I don't want to say guarantee because I don't guarantee anything, but I would be willing to bet that you would have more clarity about whatever decisions you are toiling with and have been toiling with. And again, to come back to this notion of authenticity, all of this is in service of spiritual transparency so that you can begin to understand, okay, the fear is not who I am. That is not who I am. But the answers that I receive from examining that fear is who I am. The clarity that I receive is who I am. That is what I mean by authenticity. And once you begin to have clarity around these places and spaces where you're like, I didn't even know that's who I was. I didn't even know that that was important to me. I didn't know that I valued that. And you can begin to make more choices around, okay, so how do I honor that? What does that look like to show up in that way? Perhaps more aligned to your soul self, perhaps more aligned with your soul path, whatever divine path it is that you chose before you came here. We all choose these lessons. We choose the path we're going to take. We choose the partners we will partner with. We choose all of it. We choose all of it. We all have choice. We all have choice. And if that is true, it means that you are ready. It means that you have everything you fucking need to descend into your shadows and the darkest parts within you to understand yourself and to have more clarity around who you are on a soul level and to begin to walk that path. Because without the understanding, without the clarity around who you are, it is far more difficult for you to walk the path that you chose when you came here. And so, in this moment, the question that they are flowing to you is, where is it? Where is your deepest place of fear in this moment? Because you know, if you're listening to this podcast and you've made it this far into this episode, you know that there is something that is holding you back. There is some fear, whether it's financial security, whether it's, people aren't going to love me, I'm going to be exiled or cast out, I won't fit in. There is some fear that is keeping you stuck. Maybe it's a result of trauma. And I know that well. There is some fear that is ready to be examined, that is ready to be reckoned with, and that is ready for you to receive the lesson from. How can we hold space in our hearts to be so deeply grateful for the fears that arise on this path so that we can begin to reckon with, okay, what part of me is triggered right now by this fear? What part of my energy body is resistant to going into this fear and understanding it and reckoning with it? What part of me is ready to be more fully expressed and could not have been highlighted without the fear being here first? It's such an interesting way to navigate our experience. It's so different because we live in a culture and in a world that prioritizes the avoidance of fear. We live in a place and a space and a dimension where the avoidance of fear is paramount, and the avoidance of anything that causes fear. So when we think of spiritual bypassing, of bypassing the parts that feel hard, avoidance of fear is right there at the top. It's the hardest thing that we can do, is to descend into our deepest fears. It's the most shadow work that we could do. It is the most shadowy work that we can do. And so in this moment, I just encourage you to breathe, to really feel into your body. Where is this fear showing up for you? Where in your body are you feeling it? It might be like a tightness, or like your stomach's upset, or there's just like all of a sudden you're cramping in your shoulder. But there is some place where this fear is showing up in your body, and you get to breathe into that space and let that be the first encounter that you have with your fear. And then with time, you can become even more curious. What is it? What is the fear that's associated with this aching in my body? Maybe it's in your mind. Perhaps it's your anxiety just going nuts, right? There's so many ways that our fears show up in our body. And if you have trouble really knowing what the fear is, your body is trying to give you clues at all times. And in fact, for me, the fear kept me sick. It kept me medicated and anxious and depressed. Our bodies are giving us signals at all times. And you are worthy of a life that doesn't have this debilitating sense of fear at the forefront and at the center of everything that you do. Because what ends up happening is this fear begins to dictate our life. We make choices, we behave in ways that either avoid the fear completely, or whatever it is that we're fearing, or we just live fearfully. We just make choices based on the fear. And if you found this podcast, if you are this far along in the episode, I can say with so much confidence that you are somebody who is meant to move past the fear, to embody the lessons that this fear has for you, and to move forward in a way that is so much more restorative and easeful and purposeful and loving and light. And it's not to say that my life, having done all this shadow work, my life is not one where I don't worry and anxieties don't touch me. It's like, no, I still have all of that. It's just not where I live anymore. I don't live in my anxiety. I don't make choices around work based on that. I make choices that are aligned with the opposite of that, with how it feels to be deeply peaceful. And I say yes because it is a full body yes. And if I do notice a fear coming up, rather than making choices based on that fear, I say, that's really interesting. Let me examine that fear a little bit to see what it has to teach me and what's still in the way from my full body yes. So I love you all so much. I'm so excited for your path ahead. There's so much to learn together. There's so many places for us to go. I'm starting my second book. I've been reckoning with that as well. I kept kept trying to start it and it just wasn't starting. And then all of a sudden it's like, like here it is, the creative clarity that often comes after a ton of shadow work. And there's just so much brilliance and beauty ahead of all of us. And I'm so, so grateful to share this path with you. If you want to know more about me, or if you want to connect or see if there's some work that we can do together, I offer many different ways to do that. You can find all of the information in the show notes, or just go to my website, shamanleilani.com. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, all of the places at Shaman Leilani. And your guides really just need you to know that you have got this. You've got this. You're capable. You're beautiful. You're strong. You are listening, or you wouldn't be here. Source doesn't bring people to my podcast, at least not people who listen all the way through that are not ready to walk on their path, to prioritize their authenticity, to begin to hear from and be expressive of their soul self and their soul path. It is not a coincidence you're here. And I'm so, so grateful you are. So for now, be still, my friends, and live into your impact. I'm so, so grateful you're here, and I'll chat with you soon.